Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system. Currently working on the salary analysis information section. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant and founder here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in this video, I'd like to go over what we did in our last video. What we did was we essentially created a filter to where we can select just a completely basic employee compensation or salary analysis chart strictly by salary and experience. But then we also created this filter piece up here to where it would dynamically change the content of this chart based on whatever value is here. Now, we already knew we had gender, and to get it working, I didn't have anything for age. As you can see, it's kind of broken down here. And then race, simply just threw in some things here. And then veteran, we also didn't have anything. Now, the one thing that I want to do is go back to the code and kind of talk through. I know it was very quick, but I want to talk through what's happening with that code and what it's actually doing. And I also want to check the functionality of this. Okay, so that's working. Good. Because we kind of didn't check this the last video. So our trend line is still working. So let's check our divisions. So our divisions, okay, our division's working. I'd like to reset this back to choose. And then if we do gender, race, okay, that's interesting. So it's not actually populating the data except for gender. Let's try the other piece here. Okay, so the job title is working. Same with the trend line. Gender is working. Race is populating. So the legend's populating. It's just the data's not updating. So as we're going through, we will probably discover why that is. It may be simply being overwritten. I don't know. We'll find out. But let's jump back into our code here. And let's actually walk through what's happening. Because, like I said, we went through that code pretty quickly, or that episode pretty quickly last time. And I realized it was quick. So I want to go back and just really drill in what is occurring. So this is our header, our head section, I mean. And we want certain things to be in our head and certain things to be after the head loads. A chart, any kind of chart loader or whatnot we probably don't need that, should always come up in the head section because you want that to run first thing. Even before the body loads, you want this to be ready and initialized so it can fill the body, especially when the chart is being created within the body. And we use this script here to essentially call the API from Google to load various charts and packages and code charts. Then what we did is we declared some empty global variables. We did the option base, the chart data, and then we created this all data. Because up till the last episode, the only data that we were really focusing on was the gender data. We weren't focusing on age or race, ethnicity, veteran status, or whatnot. And after we declared these, now remember at this point in time, when these are declared, they're empty. There's nothing inside of them. To include type, I mean, it's not even an array, it's not an object, it's nothing. It's just, this is a variable and eventually it will contain something. And then what we wanted to do was we wanted to initialize our options. And the reason we wanted to initialize our options way up here is because we wanted to make sure that these options were declared ahead of time before any other piece of the chart was actually created. And the reason we wanted to do that was so the chart framework would be built as well as this trend line. So what's happening here is this options base and everything here that it's equal to is being placed inside here once this initialize option piece is called. Now, this initialize option piece is being called before the body's actually being called. So what's happening is it's being called. Let's find out where it's going to be called. It's being called right here in our process data. And this will come up later because what we ended up having to do was essentially connect a lot of functions together and chain them in a way to where everything would be fired and created in sequence. So it's being called right here in our process data, and this process data is being called a few different places. And then it's also being called, scroll down right here. So before this script ends, it is being called again, just to make sure that it is fresh and updated. So then what ends up happening is we declare this fetch draw data chart. Now this fetch draw data chart before the last episode was the function that kicked off everything. We had to change this because we couldn't just essentially call this function to call this function because now we were handling more than one data and essentially creating different I don't want to say instances, but different variations of the chart data in order to populate it. So what we had to do was we first had to send information over to our get salary data on our Google Apps Script side. That thing would run. And what that looks like is this piece right here. It would run, it would create a salary array, and then it would use our helper function to pull out all of these elements and create an object. And each one of these would then be sent back over here as data. Now, instead of just calling a function with a success handler, we simply grab that data and then we use that data to assign it to our all data global variable. So now all the data is now stored right here. And then what we did was we called this draw filter chart function. So this draw filter chart function, you scroll all the way down here, has quite a bit of functions in order to get this to work smoothly. Okay, here it is. What this does is it accepts a filter type. And if it doesn't receive anything for that filter type, it sets that type to default. And then what ends up happening is at this point, we then create the new Google data table because remember, our scatter plot chart has to come from some sort of a table. And instead of writing the table in here, we're getting that table dynamically. So we have to build it. And what we do is we take within this chart data variable, we add a column that is a number for experience, add another column, which is number and salary, and then we add a third column, which takes our string and our role of a style. This is how we handle the gender, the ages, and things like that. And then instead of doing the color map how we had it, because the way the color worked is it was only focused on the gender. We only mapped out male, female, and non-binary. Instead, what we needed to do was we needed to map based on the filter type. Now, this filter type is actually coming from our dropdown, this filter dropdown. So whatever filter types coming in here, and remember, this is all dynamically. The only thing that's not dynamic and is hard-coded is our linear and polynomial, because this will never change. But this is all coming from our spreadsheet. And whatever type is selected in here, that is what's going to be passed up here to our filter type. So our color map is going to create a variable that's going to be equal to this function that passes that filter type. Now, there's nothing in this filter type right now until we fire it. And we'll get to the place where it's fired here pretty soon, because we got to get the value of that drop-down box. So right now, it's just calling this. But what happens is when this is declared, it then fires that function. So when we come down here to this function, get color map, what needs to happen before that function moves on is it needs to map all of this data right here. And what's happening is it's mapping it in an object, and it's declaring that the gender, if it's male, it's going to be blue, female is going to be red, non-binary is going to be green. Now you'll notice that some of these, male, female, we have to look at how this is being brought across and to our data. Sometimes it comes in as objects, sometimes it comes in as strings, and things like non-binary or our demographics with spaces and interesting characters like this will sometimes trigger a type error. So this could be coming over as, string or whatnot, but things like non-binary should just be in string. And you can do that by running it and then finding it by hitting F12 and finding it in the console log of the page. It'll tell you string unknown or string error, type error is what it's called. And then we get down here to race. Now, where these are coming from, when we come up here to our Google Apps Sscript side, these are coming from right here. Now you'll notice that the way that we labeled them here is different than the way that they are here. One's uppercase, one's lowercase. So we have to manage that. What we can do is just take everything to lowercase, which is what we'll be doing here in the future. Now what we can do is we can change all of these colors, like we have blue, red, so we can change all of these colors here. We can do non-Hispanic, Latino, Caucasians for red, and these come specifically from the EEO report. So we can do this as, purple. This one here can be, green, blue. We're going to run out of colors here in a second. We can do this as, let's go light blue. I'm not sure if that's a color. And then this, we can just have be this. And we can always go through and change these colors once we look at what's actually happening. And the age. Now the age is going to be interesting because these are actually within our web app data. So when you come over here and look at our web app data, you can see that these values are strings there. But when we get to age, our age is simply a number. So in order to have our age be in these categories, we're going to have to do something on the back end to actually produce this. And by back end, I mean on our Google Apps Script side. So instead of just age being row 7, we can say age being, we can create some logic or a loop and then put that into categories. And we'll have to do the same thing to the veteran, because veteran, we don't want, I suppose we could, instead of just veteran being veteran or non-veteran, I suppose we could just break it down the way we have it. But our age, we don't want to do, every single age. We want it to be clumped like under 25, 25 to 34, and so on. So we'll have to put those into categories. And the veteran status, what we can do with the veteran status for now is, let's come back over here to our sheet, and I'll show you what we can do to help this veteran status out. We can simply put this into a string and then copy over the rest of them. And we'll do this one as, we'll do blue. And then we can come over and grab the rest of these, because that way we can drill into it other than just having, if it's a veteran, yes or no. Because it might be nice to know how many disabled veterans you have, how many, depending on your strategy or whatnot. Yellow, and I think we have 2 more here. But this way it'll pick it up. Oh, no, we just have one. Just have one. Veteran other, and veteran other will just make black. Okay, because remember when we were actually producing our chart and we were going through these filters, what was happening was the legend was populating, but not anything else. So the legends, the legends will show this, but more to come on that. And what we have here is a default value. Now remember up here, the default filter type is default, and that default comes from right here. If it's default, it's going to produce the string default, and it's going to make the color that. So then what we want to do is, after we run this function, we want this function to return this maps data, the object, based on the filter type. And if that filter type doesn't exist, then we want it to just return back default for everything. So then what happens is, now this variable is filled with what we just went through. It can continue on. So now that this color map is filled with this get color map and all the filter types by the returned value here, this function can then continue, because in order to declare this, it has to complete this function. Once it completes that function and this is filled with that returned value, it can carry on. So that is actually a key component of how we're actually able to make this functional, and how we're able to chain different functions that can be called from different sources in line with our draw filter chart. And then, of course, we carried on our empty arrays for our calculations. And here is when we did something different. Instead of using the data, we used the all data, which is now the global variable. And then we ran a for each on that. For every row, we declared a constant variable called filter value. We took the filter type for each row and we put it to lowercase. That takes care of that uppercase for race and lowercase for race. Now everything is just lowercase. And if that filter type didn't exist, then it would set it to default. And this shouldn't be gray. This is gray blue is what that is. Forgot the blue in there. And then after this filter was filled, or after this variable was filled, we then use that to create that color variable. And that color variable is equal to this now that it contains data. And that's why this has to run before this. And then we pass the filter value through that and then map the color. And if it's default, if the return value is default, then it's going to be that gray blue as well. And then what we can do is after we did all of this, we can then chart our data. And then we can add that row within our table here. So we had to do all of this in order to finish building our table. And for every line in that table, we do the experience, which is our first column, salary, which is our second column. And since we are stylizing this whole piece right here, is because we want the color based on the gender, the race, or whatnot. And that is this third column here. And then this right here stayed the same. We are just populating all of this. And then after we got done with this for each and that table is populated, then we can perform the calculations. These are all our calculations for those drop-down boxes, or for these right here. And then after that, then we can work on drawing our actual chart. So everything we did up to this point was simply creating the table virtually and storing it in our chart data. And then we can take that chart data and then draw it. So we declared a variable for a chart. Now remember, this is a global variable because this global variable is going to change as we update our data. And we drew our chart with our chart data, which was updated up here as well as our options base. So now every time this draw filtered chart runs, or this process data runs, which is connected to our draw filtered function, it is going to grab the filter type. So that's how we're able to actually modify the contents of a chart based on a drop-down selection. And then we couldn't just leave it that way because what we needed to do was update our legend by calling an update legend function and passing that color map to it, which was whatever was updated and put in here at that time. So then what we needed to do was create this update legend, which is right here. Now we had to do something a little bit different because if you remember, we only had it mapped out for our male, female, non-binary. What we needed to do was map it out based on the key from that color map, which contains all this data, which contains all of these maps. So what we needed to do was create a function or create a variable called, we called it legend container, and that just simply got our chart legend element. And then we created this legend HTML, and we had to construct an object keys out of that color map. And then we had to map it by those keys, by these. And then for every single one of those keys, we then created our division spans, which would then, one, color code it to whatever key it belongs to. and it would essentially look our object age under 25 would be the color pink. Next one would be 25 purple, and so on. And then what we had to do was we had to join this because it came to us not as a flat array, not as, not as something like this. It came as multidimensional. So we had to reduce that all the way down and join everything together to where it was just one line and not a series. And then we could take our legend container and set the inner HTML to this legend HTML, and then that took care of our function. And then to ensure that every chart piece was ready to go before getting the data, we would run this, and this would then run the initialize options and fetch our data chart. So it's kind of a series of continuous refreshing and update. The one thing that we haven't done yet is actually call this whole thing. And we did this in our JavaScript down here. So what we did was we created a filter drop-down variable, and that is obviously attached to that element with the ID of filter drop-down, the demographics drop-down. And then we checked if the filter drop-down was there, if this came back true. If it wasn't loaded or existed, that would be false. And if it did exist, then we added an event listener that was listening for a change in this filter dropdown. And then it would take that event and then run a function. And that function would then grab the value of that filter dropdown at the time of that event change and set it to this selected filter variable. And then what we did was we took that variable and passed it to our draw filter chart to be fired or to run. And then if this wasn't available or something went wrong here, we did a console log with DD element not found. This is sort of just a debugging log right here. And that's how we were actually able to essentially create, let's refresh this. That's how we were able to essentially create the filtered function. Now we changed the color on the race. Light blue is not a valid hex color. Okay, so we got to go back and change that. So let's come back here and change that real quick. Let's make it not light blue. Let's make it so that is in our maps. Okay, so light blue is not a recognizable color. Let's make this pink. We'll do it pink for now. Okay, so now what I did is I came back over here. This used to be light blue, like that. Or it used to be light blue, but now it's pink. Okay, so now let's come back over here and refresh this and see where we're at. Fires perfectly. So now we can come down here to race. You'll see, yeah, we have to do some of those colors. That's really hard to see. But it shouldn't be hard to see once we narrow it down by division and job title. And then veteran. Veteran is a little different. We have the veteran yes, no. So we'll have to go through and figure that out. But we do have the gender and age we'll have to figure out. And veteran, veteran we'll have to actually look and see what we got here, what's going on there. But the one thing that I want to, now that we've kind of talked about what's happening, I want to address this piece. So our division and our job title works, but the only data being populated in the filter after we do this is the gender, which is interesting because what that means is a few things can be happening. One, when we select this, it's overriding that all data variable. only with certain data or the gender data. Or after it does this, or how this is getting its data from our spreadsheet, doesn't contain anything other than gender. So it doesn't include the age data or the race data. So let's actually go back and look at what could be occurring here. So let's go over to our total rewards and find our, let's see, where is it? Get comp filter. So when it registers comp division, it's going to come down here, do all this stuff, and we'll fix this too. We'll adjust this. And then it's going to fetch data and draw a chart. Okay. Which is fine. But then it's going to fire this process data and get this comp div filter. I'm not thinking it's overriding it because we're using this fetch data and draw chart, excuse me. So essentially that's redoing the whole thing. It's going to slow it down, but it's redoing everything. So I'm thinking it may be the second option, to where it doesn't have the data available coming back to it, because we're not passing get salary. We're passing this one. So let's go back over here to our analytics, because we're not passing this. What we're passing is, okay, this. And you see it only has gender. That's why gender still works, because it only has gender. And it's also populating the position time and the employee count well as well. So this here should actually correct this. We need to assign these pieces here. Okay, so let's go back over here to our sheet and figure out exactly where our data is. Okay, so we have our union. Not sure why we're doing it this way, but it might be nice to see how union employees are paid. We'll take it we'll add it just to be there for the future. Okay, so this is index based. So even though it's 21 columns over, it's going to be 20. And then everything else should be 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, so let's come back over here. This should be 20, 21, 22, and 24. And then what we can do is grab this, because I'm pretty sure, yep, this is the same. So now let's save this and then refresh our chart and see what happens. Okay, so it's loaded. Age needs to be aligned, because that's right, because we're not broken down by category. Veteran, there's still something registering here with veteran. We'll have to look at what the value is of veteran. Race, okay, so race works. So now let's change this. Should probably have this reset up here too to choose. So we have gender. Now let's go down here to race and see if it updates. And it does. Okay, good. And then we can do the same thing to job title. Okay, refreshed it. Well, we'll refresh that, but it refreshed data. So if we do race, yep, there it is. And gender, age, gender, choose. Okay, good. So that fixed it. So now let's go look at what's actually occurring with our veteran. Okay, so our veteran status is the value it's looking at. Non-veteran, disabled veteran, veteran other than honorable, veteran other. So this veteran status is, I'm thinking, where it's going to be held up at. So let's come down here and see what our value is. So it should not be veteran status, actually, because this right here is what we're looking at. So this veteran status, we had it hard coded before we passed it dynamically to our divisions, jobs, and no, not that, but our get first drop down and all that. So let's actually come up here and see how this is coming to us. So it's coming as just veteran. And then when we populate this data right here, it's setting the value equal to that category. And that category is actually going to be that. So we need to make that equal to the value. So what I'm looking at right now is this demographic. This is where it's getting those values. And the value here is just veteran. So when it's over here looking for veteran status, it's not going to find it. Okay, so let's save this and then see how that works. And if not, I may have to do some troubleshooting, and we can tackle that on the next video when we work on this age piece here. Okay, so let's go back to our sheet here and see if that did anything. Yep, that's exactly what it was. And then we can come up here and do finance. And then still have to redo that, do veteran, and yep, perfect. There it is. Race, gender. Okay, good. And all. Okay, good. So now we have the ability to filter through 3 of our 4. The age is going to be unique because we're going to have to put things into categories, which isn't too difficult. It's by far not as difficult as what we just did. Should be just a simple fix, and then we just need to update this with this filter information here, and then reset that, and then we should have a fully functional filterable salary analysis dashboard of sorts that we can start running some good information off of. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. If you like what we're doing, please hit that subscribe button. If you have an idea on something we should cover, or possibly a question about a video that we've already covered, please drop us an email. Our email is in the description box. And until next time, please take care.